Hi guys! Is it working? Please let us know if this is live now, if you can hear us. This is in a bit of a delay, so we have to wait. Seems to be. Okay. Ah, can I still see stream incoming soon. Can chat let us know if we're live? Please? Okay. Okay, I think it's working, Charles. I think we're here.
Fantastic,
Yes!
fantastic.
Hi! Welcome to the Broken Sword 25th anniversary stream, which is totally not a week late! Woo!
In fact, Wendy, it's more than a week late. It's a week and a day late.
Oh, yes, that is true. Well, the thing is, isn't it true that because it was published in a time before the unified internet really existed the way that we know it today, that there's multiple birthdays that we could look
You could say
into?
that. You could say
Yeah.
that it was published at a time at which even the Orthodox Church in the East and the Roman Catholic Church in the West couldn't agree on the date of Easter. And indeed, they still can't. Or indeed Christmas. So time is relative, isn't it?
Time is relative, exactly. So we're completely on time. Great. So people can hear us. The audio is working. We're feeling great. Charles is lit perfectly.
I did say, didn't I? That the beam comes down, makes me look so bald. Look, I've got so
It
much hair
doesn't.
up here.
Can you
I
guys
don't,
please tell him that he doesn't look bald? Please. And that it doesn't matter.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah, we love a good dome. Um, yeah, but 25 years, Charles. Can you believe it?
I
25.
know, I know. And it was an extraordinary. I am 59, so 59, 49, 39, 35. So it's, I mean, for many people listening, it will be a lifetime or maybe more than a lifetime. It's a long, long time. And I mean, Wendy, you know, I know, we all know how extraordinarily passionate so many Broken Sword fans are. And
Yes.
we say it every time, but it's just a huge privilege. It's just a huge privilege. And how lovely to be here to be able to talk about it 25 years later.
Yeah. So in honor of all of this, we went to every account I could find. We asked on Twitter, we asked on Facebook, we asked on Discord. I don't think we asked on Instagram, but that's on me. That's my fault. Um, but we've gotten a lot of really good messages, and I have tried to curate together with Luke, who is streaming this physically, to see if we can find questions that have been asked repeatedly, but also like that have a really nice flavorful answer to give. However, we also want to take questions from YouTube live chat. So if you guys have questions for us, simply ask it by tagging the Revolution Software account and type your question in, and we will get around to adding some at the end that we can then also answer. That gives us a bit of time putting it into the stream and curating them and making sure that you guys are heard too. So don't be scared to ask questions.
Please do.
It's not too late for you, in case you didn't see the post. But to avoid
Can I
not
can I answer a question that I saw on Twitter earlier?
sure, if you want to answer Boden's question in advance.
Yeah, and that was very interesting. It was, what inspiration was there coming forward at the beginning of Revolution? And that's a really great question, because back in 1990, we had been playing Sierra games, King's Quest, which took itself extraordinarily seriously, King Graham of Daventry. And what those games did was they would give you an object which you had to find at the beginning and then use at the end of the game. And if you failed to find it, then you'd reach the end of the game and you'd have no idea that you hadn't got it, and it would be very frustrating. It felt like a very old-fashioned way of designing games. And also, the characters were very cliched old English. I mean, I think they're brilliant. I think Roberta Williams was just a genius, and her husband Ken Williams, and good for them. but it felt like something needed to change. And Tim Schafer said the same, actually. I heard him recently saying that what we wanted to do was really embolden and enlighten and revolutionize the adventure genre by making it more fun to play. And another developer that I would like to give a shout out to is a company called Level 9 that sadly ran into some trouble around about 1991, 1992. But they wrote really innovative adventure games as well. So there was a real sense around about the 90s that the older games had been brilliant, but there was this sort of punk movement to change. And I'd like to think that we were sort of part of that, because whenever we've written adventure games, we've done our very best to make sure that the puzzles are absolutely true to the character motivation and to the world, so that they make sense. And that's one of the reasons why it takes so long to write our blooming games, because we keep going back and say, well, is that what that character would do? Would this work in this situation? And that's completely different, of course, to the slapstick games like LucasArts, which I love, and they're fantastic. What they do, of course, is they have many puzzles that make no sense whatsoever. So the reward is retrospective. So that so the fun and the humor comes from stumbling on the answer, often from using objects in a variety of combinations till eventually, and then retrospectively getting a really funny. So we went on quite different routes. They were going for the slapstick humor, and we were going for the character motivation and for the logic within the world itself. That's me.
Okay.
Finished.
That was a really good way to start us all off. And we're already seeing a lot of questions in chat. On this one occasion, I want to ask you all to look at the wealth of 25 years that this man has given you, and that for now the future is still blank.
So what we ought to say is that both Wendy and the fabulously good-looking Luke are standing with their fingers over the mute button. And I've been told that if I say anything, or even if I look like I'm going to say anything about the future, which we are sworn to secrecy about, then they are going. That's my joke. They're going to mute me.
Okay. So let's start off with the first question. Luke, do you have to prompt for the question? And which one are we asking first? Because I will see the stream on a delay. We didn't think this one through, huh? Because I want to read it.
I can answer. I can answer another one that I saw.
Okay. In the meantime,
While you're getting ready. Yeah, and quite a lot of people ask about the difference between adventure games and what an adventure game is versus the other genres. And I think that adventure games, in many ways, are the purest in terms of narrative, because what we do is we absolutely interweave the story and the puzzles, and the puzzles. Solving the puzzles directly drives the story, and even in an RPG, generally you have some sort of grind mechanism which unlocks stories to move forward, whereas we interleave the two, and that makes adventures in many ways much harder to write, because at every point we're having to write unique puzzles rather than the grind mechanism. But the big difference but one of the huge advantages we have, of course, in writing interactive narrative, is that because the story is being driven forward by people solving puzzles, then it becomes very compelling. And to our wonderful fans, I would hope that, and certainly people say that in many ways, the stories that we write in the games last with them longer than for a linear medium, because they've worked so hard to drive those stories forward. And certainly people remember what happened. A lot of people remember the beginning of Broken Sword 25 years ago. And there aren't very many films or books where you'd remember that opening scene quite so vividly. So we're very lucky. The problem that we have is that in a film or a book, you create empathy. Of course, we want to create empathy, and that's a direct emotional relationship with our protagonist, our hero. In this case, of course, George, and to an extent, Nico. But in a film, you can spend pretty much as long as you want, up to a third of the way through, until you have what's called the inciting incident. And the inciting incident is where you turn the life of the protagonist around, and that's what the story is about, regaining some sort of balance. The problem we have in games is that because we need to create a motivation and we need to create a context, that inciting incident that linear mediums have plenty of time to build up has to happen almost immediately, because if it doesn't, then the players are not going to work to solve the puzzles. So that means a completely new approach to how we do that. And that's one of the reasons why so many games have such cliche characters, or indeed why licenses work so well. So, if you play Harry Potter, Harry Potter comes on, you know who Harry Potter is, you know what his motivation is, you know who all of those people in the world are, and you can just get on with the gameplay. When you write original games, you have this difficulty in immediately creating empathy without being cliched. And hopefully people feel that we did a reasonable job at creating these two characters, George and Nico, in this world, bringing them to life pretty quickly without making them cliched, I hope.
So
That's
that's perfect. Let's start with the first question, which was a question by Jim via Twitter. And it was, where are any areas in Broken Sword that you wanted to put in or return to from previous games, but couldn't fit in for the time or story reasons?
Right. So let me tell you about, this is a slightly different answer, and I'll think about it. I'll have worked it out. But I quite like the fact that when I first met Noreen, my wife, who was one of the founders of Revolution, and we started, researching, and I started thinking about the story. It turned out that she comes from an area, a village, small village in County Limerick in the Republic of Ireland, called Newcastle West, which is where Ballygowan water comes from, but not that that's relevant to this. But it's called Newcastle West because the new castle was actually a Templar castle built in presumably the 14th century. And so she came from a Templar area. So Loch Narn, I didn't want to call it Newcastle West because it doesn't look like Newcastle West. So I wanted to come up with a fictitious name. So actually, Loch Narn is her sister's husband is called Johnny Loch Narn, and he's a doctor in Newcastle West. And I'm afraid I rather naughtily stole his name, misspelt it, not deliberately. My spelling is terrible, and that's where they come from. But to answer the question, I would love to go back to that opening scene. So many people talk about the opening to the first Broken Sword with the voice of Rolf Saxon, the wonderful Rolf Saxon, the music of Barrington Phelan, the incredible layouts of Owen Cahill, and there was so much love that went into that. And also in Broken Sword 2, we had the Marseille docks, which were actually based on New York drawings. Owen actually came to York, and I took him round, and we obviously knew what Marseille looked like, and we got the warehouses. But things like the crane that comes over, that's in York, and anybody who's in York will probably recognise it because it's down by the river. And the bridge that you get thrown off, that George gets thrown off when he gets killed in Broken Sword 1, it's meant to be thrown into the Seine, but I'm afraid that's again the Ooze Bridge drawn, because we thought we could probably, that it would look all right. But yeah, the two from the very beginning that I have a great deal of fondness for, as I say, is the first section of Broken Sword, and in Broken Sword 2, the Marseille, with the dog 20, named 20 because he's the dog number 20, and obviously there are at least 19 before and maybe some after.
Next question, I believe, is from Leonard via Discord. What was the biggest technical hurdle while creating Broken Sword or virtual theater, and how did the team overcome it?
Oh, what, Leonard? Gosh, I thought you were going to ask. I thought I was going to be asked easy questions. The biggest technical question, one of the biggest technical problems, I guess, difficulties, was that when we wrote, well, I'm actually going to answer this slightly different. I'm going to start with virtual theatre. So for any of you who played our first game, which was called Lure of the Temptress, that was the introduction of something that we called virtual theatre. Now, in RPGs, of course, characters walk around the world all the time, but at the time, this felt very new. And in theory, it was great. Characters would walk off, and you could follow them, and they'd be living their own lives. But the problem is that in a 2D screen, they'd walk off, and you have no idea where they were. So you try and follow them, and they might be going in the same direction as you, so you might be following them forever. So often you found yourself just waiting, and till they came round again, which is one of the reasons why when we went to Beneath the Steel Sky, we had many fewer, and we made their route much, much more obvious. And I remember in Lure of the Temptress, the problem is that if you couldn't have, from a technical perspective, too many in a room, because both in terms of the processing power and I think the number of colors as well. So what you do is you'd have them, and as they came through, they'd teleport somewhere else, which we thought was very, very clever at the time, because of course nobody noticed. But actually what it did was it made the whole virtual theatre system even more difficult to understand, because characters that you expected to appear suddenly were on the other side of the world. But when we then wrote Beneath the Steel Sky, the CD had just been invented, and the CD took us from a floppy disk, which was 1.4 meg, to suddenly having hundreds of megs. And for those of you unfortunate enough to have played Broken Sword on Amiga, which you'd have to be, that was a long time ago. But although it wasn't that much before the beginning of Broken Sword, then there were 14 or 16 floppy disks, and I don't know how anybody put up with it, because there would have been so much disk swapping, and if you took the disk out too early, the whole game would crash, and people were so tolerant. So the idea of then moving to CD, where suddenly you had all of this memory. But the problem is that we then did voice recording, and we put movies in, and the movies took a lot of memory. And if you think that those early CDs were single much faster. But the data that you got out on a single speed really wasn't very much. So we had to compress the hell out of our movies. And so that's one of the reasons why the movies look so crude. We tried retrospectively, when we didn't have those constraints, to keep the style and to keep the feeling of them, but to make them a little bit better. But as I remember, I think one of the biggest technical issues at the time was the vast amounts of data that we were trying to get off a single speed CD, and the problems that entailed. I'm sure there were many, many other things. I'll check with my friend Tony, because he was at the cutting edge. What I do remember is that Tony was very proud that we had what we considered to be a network system, and the network system is that he'd sit opposite Dave Sykes, and he would save something onto a floppy, and then he'd frisbee across the room, and Dave would catch it like a ballerina in the air, put it in and copy it across, and they threw this CD, this floppy disk backwards and forwards, and that was the best form of network that we could afford in those early days. I have no idea why I said that, because it's got nothing to do with the question.
I think people are very pleased to have heard this story. I know I am. Okay, let's move on to the next question. It's from Gavin via Facebook. Why exactly did you remove the death scenes from the director's cut of Shadow of the Templars? Ooh, that one hit Charles in the heart.
Ooh, I know. There is going to be a question, and Wendy might mute me, and but we would really, really love to bring the games to new platforms, and there are things that we would do, and one of them is, to answer the question directly, the reason for the original that we changed it was that when we did the Game Boy Advance version, the way it was written was pretty inefficient, and we thought the only way we could get it onto a Game Boy Advance was by re-implementing it from scratch. So what we did is we implemented everything that we could think about and know about, and the really hardcore fans noticed that there were things missing. And wouldn't it be great to get those things back in again? There are also lines that were never played, and if they're appropriate, wouldn't it be fantastic to bring those as well? Because then we'd have even more than there was on the original. Why did we deserve it? I think it was a silly decision. I mean, ultimately, I take the responsibility, but it doesn't really make any sense. People love the dying. I think at the time we thought that people were frustrated. And I tell you what, probably one of the publishers, not that I wish to blame the publishers because I need to take responsibility, but probably one of the publishers came to us and said, oh, no, you shouldn't be doing this. Anyway, it's a great question and thank you. And I think it was probably a mistake. Although we did make the goat puzzle easier and more logical.
I think
So
people
give us our due.
thought. I think a lot of people think that they want wanted the goat puzzle to stay hard, and I think it had
That's only
some
the people who solved
infamy.
it. That's only the people
Yeah, it's
infamy. You say that, Wendy. Infamy. They've all got it. Infamy is all I would say.
Yeah.
That's my joke, by the way.
Well, I think that it makes a lot of sense to change over a director's cut over into, like, I mean, in your case, right? You wanted people to experience something additional, and not only did you take things away, you also added some things, which made it.
We did. But the death. The reason that it was a mistake to remove the death is that death adds jeopardy. And what we want the sense in this game that there is a genuine jeopardy. And obviously in the slapstick games, I mean, for those who loved Monkey Island, we remember falling off a cliff and then there's a rubber tree that you bounce and you bounce back on again because you can't die in a LucasArts game. But we wanted a degree of jeopardy, and that's why we put the killing in, or the ability to die in, so that the player got the sense that if they didn't get it right, if they weren't able to solve the puzzle in time, I think the first time you die in Broken Sword, the original, I believe, is if you walk out of the hotel with the manuscript. But then we had the scene with Khan in Syria, where you have a certain amount of time to shake his hand with a buzzer, otherwise he shoots you. Then in Broken Sword 2, I mean, a memorable one, which I actually really liked because I thought it was quite dramatic, was Nico is being throttled and, she has 10 seconds or so before she passes out, and she's got to work out that she has to stab Kazak with the obsidian dagger. And
Charles, spoilers.
oh, sorry.
Everybody played the game.
Yeah. So this is a very long-winded way of saying that I don't know, and I think it was a mistake.
All right, let's weave in. Aw. Let's weave in a YouTube one. Mercher, I'm sorry if that's not how you pronounce your name. Mercher via YouTube live chat asked, who was the inspiration for George Stope?
Oh, what a good question. Gosh, I'm having to think back 25 years now. I really should have anticipated this. What I would say is that when I was very young, my mother took me to Paris, and I am going to try and answer this question, by the way. I'm just sort of going off on a bit of a tangent, and I will come back. But when I was very young, I remember my mother taking me to Paris, and England and indeed Britain was really poor in the early 70s and the late 60s, which is no bad thing. And France was a lot richer. So to come from grimy, sooty, dark England to this light Paris with more energy and beautiful clothes and amazing food and all of these things was really kind of inspirational. So Nico and with haughty, driven, wonderful, talented, but slightly cold to George to begin with. Nico is very much born of those French women, elegant, and George. So she was the one that came first. And what we then wanted was to have a character that the fun would emerge because they were so different. Nico, brought up in the banlieue, really striving, ambitious, always wanting to get the next scoop. George turns up. He's had a comfortable life. He's a law graduate, and he's a bit bored. And he turns up. He tries to chat up Chantal, the waitress, and she's not very interested. And then as the game starts, his life gets interesting. He's thrilled. He meets Nico, and I think that in many ways, George, although he's of course the hero character, and Rolf Saxon, who I love dearly and I owe a great debt of gratitude to, has really made him who he is. But in the early days, George was really the foil to Nico, who came first.
That's a really nice answer. Okay, what was the next one? It was Karen, I think, or Kieran. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry. I need to find it. There, Karen. Did you base any characters on people you know?
Ooh.
Those are hard-hitting ones.
They are, and I have to be very careful. I mean, the answer is of course. And I've got some revenge, I have to say, on, but I daren't even say. Let me give you two examples which I wouldn't get into trouble for. And the first one is, I remember when I was doing research in Paris, and we went to see a friend, actually of Noreen's, called Martin O'Hanrahan. And he was living in Paris at the time, and the concierge, who was a bit of a gruff old man, was keeping himself to himself. And then when we came back and he heard that we were speaking English, he suddenly came out and he was really cross and really aggressive and very anti-English. And so, of course, Albert the concierge is absolutely based on him. And I don't think that the concierge would ever find out that I've said this about him. So I think I'm safe there. And the other thing is that as we were going to the airport, there was a gendarme at a crossroads trying to control the traffic, and the traffic was absolutely in chaos. And in the end, everybody started hooting, and everyone was shouting. And the guy looked around, and he realized that he was doing absolutely nothing of any benefit whatsoever. And he just walked off and sat and ordered a glass of wine in the cafe. And as he did so, the traffic started moving, and we were able to move on again. And he very much inspired me for the Moo character. Somebody who was ultimately useless but enthusiastic and good natured. And then, sorry.
Oh no, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah, no. And then, so and then more recently, I mean, absolutely, you have to design characters that you either know. I mean, in Broken Sword 5, the character was the character of the waiter, because everybody knows that French waiters are wonderful, but they're also extraordinarily arrogant and very sexy. And so it was based on the incredible Serge Gainsbourg, who a friend of mine, his father is a photographer, was a photographer, and took pictures of Serge Gainsbourg. And in return, he was given Serge Gainsbourg albums, which he brought to school. And we just loved the whole Serge Gainsbourg, Jane Birkin, Je t'aime. So that's a real character that that our waiter was sort of designed around. Philosophical, sexy, chatting up everybody, superior. I hope I'm not being too rude about French waiters. If there are any French waiters watching, then apologies. I do love you, really.
Okay, next question is from Liam Cuthbert Art via Twitter, but
Oh,
value
sorry.
Discord
One
member.
more.
Oh,
Liam, forgive me. And then, of course, from our game before that, which was Beneath the Steel Sky, we had Danielle Piermont, who we love so much that we just brought her back as Lady Piermont with the same actress in Beneath the Steel Sky. So I guess there are three. There's characters we bring from other games, obviously characters we bring forward from previous Broken Sword games, characters that I know as public characters and characters that I know individually. And yeah, I mean, the key thing in designing a character is one, you really need to know who they are, but two, they've got to have a function in the story. What you work out very quickly is that if the character doesn't have a reason for being there, in other words, if they're not part of the puzzle structure, then they're incredibly hard to write in an interesting way. So we absolutely cement those characters into the story so that we can write an individual. But we also want to make sure that they have an interesting backstory, because there's a lecturer in film theory called Robert McKee, and he's a bit of an arse, but he's very interesting in what he talks about. And I went to one of his lectures, and I remember him saying, "Thou shalt know thy world." You might not convey it to the player, but you need to know everything that happens. And the vast majority is never told to the player, but the player just instinctively knows that the world is coherent. And that's really important, because if you and a lot of the time that we spend in designing our characters and the world is making sure that there is this consistency and coherence, because if there isn't, players will just or film watchers or book readers will just get this instinct that the world isn't quite coherent, quite consistent. Wendy, you better ask me another question, because I've wandered
yeah,
off into a completely different subject.
Actually, on the topic, like just before we ask Liam's question, we wanted to sneak in the little Piedmont question that we saw from Yak Wax Lips via YouTube live chat, which was, "What's the deal with the Piemonts?"
Well, I don't know. Um, a middle-aged a middle-aged woman that finds George enormously attractive. It's the same in Beneath the Steel Sky, and it's the same in Broken Sword. And
Such a mommy.
I know, and she is a mummy, but she finds him wildly attractive. And he likes her because she's a nice woman. And hopefully nothing in that relationship is in any way dubious, because it's just fun. She's such a mummy. That's a great way of saying it. Absolutely.
I think we said two different things, but yes, let's agree. Great. Let's go back to Liam's question. I hope Luke is ready for this switch. You worked on several licensed games, Da Vinci Code, Doctor Who, etc. Is there a property you think would make a great adventure game? What are the challenges when it comes to adapting other material?
Oh, nice question. Okay. So, first of all, let me tell you why. And I've said this a million times, so forgive me if you've heard this before. But I mean, it's such a privilege to be able to write adventure games. But the problem is, at the beginning of the 2000s, we found ourselves in a position. We were working with an American publisher called THQ, and for Broken Sword 3, we found in a position where they made about $5 million profit, and we made about a £200,000 loss. And actually borrowed the money from the bank, and it was just insane. It was just crazy. And then Broken Sword 4 was the same. So we found ourselves at the end of Broken Sword 4 in a position where we were writing games that were successful, but the publishers were so powerful, they were giving us absolutely rotten deals, which made it impossible for us to be profitable. So effectively we were insolvent. We were bankrupt. I mean, we never went bankrupt, but we couldn't keep trading. So I worked on these properties like Doctor Who, which I loved. I mean, that was just a great privilege. The Da Vinci Code. Now, the Da Vinci Code was great fun. Some of our fans, and they're wonderfully generous to say this, think that Dan Brown must have played Broken Sword before he wrote the Da Vinci Code, because if anybody's in any doubt as to which came first. We were 5, 6, 7 years before the Da Vinci Code, and there are similarities. I'll give you that.
Charles.
Yeah. No, that's all I'm going to say. We're not about to go into litigation or anything. Don't worry. Or have I gone off the question?
It's a great book. It's a great movie. We're rooting for his success. They're very similar
Can I tell the story?
topics.
I've told this story. Can I tell the story? I'll tell it very briefly. Briefly. But I mean, Wendy, you've heard the Ron Howard story, haven't you?
Go on then.
Okay. I'm sure that most of you will, but I'm going to tell it again, and please bear with me. So, I actually think that the idea of the Priory of Sion is an utter, complete fallacy. It is nonsense. In Broken Sword, we have a character called Pierre Plantard, and Pierre Plantard actually was taken from a book called The Holy Blood and Holy Grail, which claims that the Priory of Sion existed, that it was created at the same time as the Knights Templar, and it basically defends the bloodline of Christ. I mean, this is all nonsense. The reason that you kind of know is two stories. The first one is that I was with a very dear friend of mine, Henry Slack, who I go off to the Pyrenees with, camping for days and days and days. And we were in a tiny little village called Florac in the Dordogne. Nothing to do with Knights Templar, nothing to do with Broken Sword. And Noreen was waiting. My son David and I were canoeing down the Dordogne. And she got a bit bored. She was waiting. She went into a little art shop. This is a village with a population of 200 people. It's tiny. Got a church, a shop, a cafe, and a little art gallery. And there was a book on there which had a cross, a Templar cross on it. And she picked it up, and the gallery owner walked over and asked her why she was interested in French. She speaks no French, and he spoke no English. But anyway, she told him about what I was doing, and he said, "Oh, come over." Turned out he was a guy called Jean-Luc Chamois, who actually interviewed Pierre Plantard in the 70s and knew all about. He'd written extensively about this mythology of the Priory of Sion and Pierre Plantard, who was just a nasty little anti-Semite who actually claimed to have created lots of secret societies. But the extraordinary thing is that we had happened to come across in this tiny village, unconnected to anything to the Broken Sword, probably the foremost, most knowledgeable person in the world on the Priory of Sion, as I was going in to talk to Take Two and the director Ron Howard about the film. So anyway, they phoned me up and they asked if I would like to be involved, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I've got this, but and then they phoned me back the next day and say, look, can you come to Los Angeles? We'll pay you a consultancy fee. We'll get a nice flight, nice hotel, and you just need to turn up. And I went, wow, is that all I need to do? Just turn up? They went, yeah, that's all you need to do is turn up. Okay, this is the life. This is the Hollywood life. And so, I get on the plane, I have a glass of wine, I'm really enjoying it, get out at Los Angeles, the sun's shining. This is Hollywood, baby. This is it. And I turn up the next morning, and the senior vice president of marketing for Sony Pictures is there. She's called Julie, and she says, Charles, thank you so much for coming. This is going to be really contentious. Ron Howard is not happy. So sit at the back, just enjoy, but don't get involved unless you have to. We're just thrilled that you're here. And I said, Julie, thank you so much. I know nothing about this project. And she said, you don't need to. Just be there. Thank you. So I sit at the back. In walks Ron Howard. And for people who don't know, Ron Howard's quite a famous movie director, and was the director of Da Vinci Code. And he walks in, he goes, Julie, I've only got 15 minutes. I'm here to tell you there's not going to be a game. And Julie says, Ron, these guys, they've got a contract. There's going to be a game. Okay, says Ron, if they've got a contract, that's fine. But the game has to come 6 months after the movie. No, Ron, it's going to be day and date. That's because that's what the contract says. So Ron's getting really angry now. And he goes, okay, but no marketing. And everyone's looking around the room. And Julie says, Ron, there's going to be a film. There's going to be marketing. and it's going to be day and date because that's what the contract says. And there's a bit of a stare off between them. And he goes, what are you going to do with my story, Julie? And she says, Ron, I'm so pleased you asked that question because we've flown this guy all the way from England and he's going to tell you what we're going to do with your story. So everybody looks around the room, including me, wondering who this, poor fall guy from England is. And, it becomes quite clear that I am this guy and I haven't got a clue what to say. So he looks at me and goes, what do you know about all of this Knights Templar stuff? And I said, well, I actually do know quite a lot of Knights Templar because I've just been to a Knights Templar ceremony in Worcester Cathedral and, described it. He said, where do you come from? I said, I come from the city of York in England, which of course is where Constantine the Great was declared emperor. He went, was it not Constantinople? It's York in England. That's because his father was the, emperor and he died. Goes, yeah. So what's the story going to be about? And I say, Ron, it's all about symbolism. Now, for anybody who's read the book or seen the film, there is nothing else you could say. But he gets really excited. He goes, do you know, that's what I think too. And everyone's looking around going, do you know, I think this might be going all right. And then he says, can you give me an example? And I sit and I have a pregnant pause. And then I say, actually, Ron, I can. In medieval paintings, the style would change, the characters would change, the way they were depicted, the backgrounds, everything would change. But the symbolism was always the same. And I waited for dramatic effect. And everybody was so tense. And I said, and that is the color of the outer garment. The Virgin Mary will always wear a blue outer garment, and Mary Magdalene will always wear a red outer garment. And he looked at his writer, Akiva Goldsmith, and he went, wow, Akiva, Sophie Neveu is going to walk out of Rosslyn Chapel wearing a shawl. And then he looked at me and says, is it red or blue? Now, red for Mary Magdalene. Red for Mary Magdalene, blue for the Virgin Mary. And I got really excited. And anyway, so then he said, what other ideas? So I basically just started telling him all this Knights Templar stuff and all this sort of cool stuff that was really nothing to do with the book at all. And we got on like a house on fire. And in the end, it went on for about an hour and a half. And we did really well and gave him lots of ideas, and that was great. And it was a privilege to be able to, contribute to that. But Sony really loved me for that because, they felt that I'd, been able to convince Ron that it was a good project. And so they asked me to fly over to New York to try and get the rights to a film called Sin City. And we met with a company, and I was introduced to a Mr. Bob and a Mr. Harvey Weinstein. But that is a different subject.
That is a completely different subject.
Okay. So next question is from Shosha, who is a great guy. We know him from Discord. He asked it on Discord, I think. But a lot of people have echoed this question, which is, have you ever considered adapting Broken Sword into a novel or a comic book? And a lot of other people commented, a TV show, a film.
Yeah, and the answer, of course, is yes. My feeling is that we have such a wonderful fan base that we would only convert it into, primarily television, because that's the biggest reach these days rather than film. But only if it was right, because we don't need to. And quite a few television companies and production companies do come to us. And broadly, what they say is, can you write a script? And the answer generally is no, because you have wonderful linear writers, television writers, and film writers, and you have games writers. And the skills are quite different. I mentioned before that that things like building the empathy. Another thing is what's called dramatic irony, which is where you have a disconnect between what the character knows and what the audience knows. And in films, you have it all the time. But in games, obviously, you have to be very careful, because if you give the player knowledge that the character doesn't have, then the player is frustrated because the character can't act out what they want. And vice versa, if you give the character more information than the player, then the character will perform actions that are not logical within the context of what the player knows at that particular time. So the skills are really, really quite different. And then we start talking, and then I get excited about the next game, and it kind of goes by the wayside. So the answer is yes, but there's never quite time. So at some point, at some point it would be great, because now with the incredible streaming services, some brilliant television, it would be a huge privilege to work with a fantastic television production company. And I hope the answer is yes, but it's just a case of finding the time to just make it happen.
Great. The next one is from Mr. Truckerman via Discord, I believe, which was using your time machine to go back 26 years. What advice about Broken Sword 1 would you give yourself?
Well, I know what everyone thinks I'm going to say, and that is come up with a blooming logical puzzle for when you get past that goat. But I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say is that and again, I am going to come back. I'm sorry, I'm going like so circular with these answers, but this, bear with me. So back in about 1994, I knew a very tall, lanky fellow called Phil Harrison, because he had worked in the games industry, and I'd given him in the 80s some projects to work on, and he was super keen. Obviously a very bright guy. And he phoned me up in about 1994 and said, "Look, I'm working for Sony, and we have this secret console project called the PSX. Would you like to come and see it?" Absolutely, I'd love to. And for those who are a little bit older, they might remember the dinosaur head that was in 3D, and it looked incredible. And he asked what we were working on, and I talked about Broken Sword. And to be quite honest with you, he wasn't enormously enthusiastic. And then the game was published by Virgin, and they were extraordinarily unenthusiastic about a PlayStation version, because they believed that the audience for PlayStation were all visceral 3D games players. So, but we did get some support within Virgin. Within Sony, I beg your pardon. Somebody called John Roberts and Martin Alltimes. And we managed to convince them to publish it. And the game launched, and it was on an absolute shoestring. We did it on a shoestring, and it launched. And the reviews were incredible. We got, in those days, the official PlayStation magazine had a circulation, I think it was 600,000 copies a month. Now, these days, 20,000 would be incredible. So 600,000 was extraordinary. And we, the reviewer, who I remember very dearly, she's called Ali West, absolutely loved the game. And she gave us a huge review. She gave us 9 out of 10. Same happened in France, same happened in Germany. And crucially, they cover mounted it in all 3. So millions of people. And in those days, the magazines were quite expensive because they had a cover mount, and people played all of the games. So an awful lot of people will remember getting into Broken Sword by playing that cover mount. So if I was to talk about myself, 26 years ago, it would be take that PlayStation version more seriously, honestly, because it's going to do well. Take it seriously, really put some work into that UI. Don't just simply map the joystick to the mouse. And I mean, I can't complain because the game got great reviews and did really well. But imagine if we'd spent just a little bit more time, another couple of weeks, really focusing on the UI. Then, who knows? I'm the goat. That's it.
Okay, next question. Luke says it's a goat one. That's good. Oh yeah, it's Pixie via Discord, and it says, "Why goats? It's always bloody goats."
Oh, I know. And do you know what? I think we should blame the wonderful Order of the Goat people from Broken Sword 5, because up until that point, I was rather embarrassed about goats. We did put goats in. We had a goat at the beginning of Lyra the Temptress. it doesn't do very much. And then in Beneath the Still Sky, we put a boy playing Fleecy maybe is there a goat or Fleecy the lamb? Anyway, it was goat-like, and then broken. And then we realised that all our games had goats in, and it wasn't a deliberate thing. It just they did. So we thought, well, we'll just keep putting goats in. And then when we did the Kickstarter for Broken Sword 5, which was just the most incredible experience, a wonderful group of fans came up with this idea of the Order of the Goat. And hang on a second, I shall show you. And I'm very proud of this goat. Isn't that goat beautiful? And I look at him, and beautifully painted, and this really not enormously well designed puzzle, which had caught so many people out in a time before the internet. So when people got stuck, they got really stuck, and they'd have to wait for the magazine to come out a month later with solutions. And it kind of turned into from Broken Sword 5 and the Kickstarter into this celebration of the Order of the Goat. And so all of that celebration was very much driven by fans, not us. And we've kind of just ridden along with it and enjoyed it, because I feel very strongly that we have the privilege of people caring a lot about Broken Sword, and it's ours. It's everybody's. It's all of ours, and we'll enjoy what people come up with, and then we'll write games and hopefully people enjoy them. And there's this sort of symbiotic relationship between the fans who come up with things and new ideas, and us who write the games. So that's why there's a bloody goat.
I love that toy goat you have, and people are quite rightly saying that we at some point need to get our shit together and make some kind of collectible goat or something like that. We do. We agree with you.
I went to EGX. In fact, look, you see, I've got a collection of goats here. I went to EGX. I have to be very careful because I have to stick the ear back on. And isn't that a beautiful goat? Look at that. It's a goat with a clown face.
Clown face on. It's so
Isn't that
cute.
sweet? And a Russian journalist gave me this. This is a Russian goat. And a lovely French lady gave me, this goat. So I have a very fine collection of goats.
That is so cute. Okay, let's move on. We have a question from Dan via Twitter, I believe, which was favorite Broken Sword antagonist, and why is it Pablo?
Pablo. Do you know what? I think my favorite is probably not Pablo. I think it's the general, the lady general in Broken Sword 2, the lady general's son, who is who tries to chat up Nico, and he's such a sleaze, and he has his comeuppance. I do like him. I also like Khan, because I think Khan reversed expectations and obviously was part of the Muslim assassin cult. God only knows why. I mean, Assassin's Creed is brilliant, but why did they come up with the idea of the assassins being like a sort of Christian cult alongside the Templars? I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. The real beauty of the assassins were that they were very, very, they were Iranian, so very Persian in that regard, extraordinarily good at killing people, and had an enormous respect for the Knights
Christians
Templar.
are also very good at killing people. In fact, they have a
great
reputation.
No. What I'm saying is they're very good at assassinating people, and they came into conflict with the Knights Templar, who are, as you say, very good. I mean, the interesting thing about the First Crusade in 1099 was that the Jerusalem was at peace, and the Muslims, the ruling Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews all kind of lived in peace. And this Crusader army came along, cut everybody to pieces, and butchered both the Muslims and the Jews. So no, I'm not judging anything at all. But all I'm saying is that the assassins were extraordinarily fearsome warriors on one side, and the Knights Templar were very fearsome on the other. And you had these two incredible groups, culturally extraordinarily different from each other. And I think what's interesting about Khan is that what we tried to do was reflect that he is culturally very different to George, but that there is enormous respect. And what that was affecting was the relationship, which I think was fascinating, between the Knights Templar and the Assassins. And I think what's also interesting about that era is that when all these crusaders came back from the Middle East, they brought back extraordinary knowledge, and it was like a sort of mini Renaissance, because there was so much knowledge that they picked up from the armies that they met over there. So I like the character. I tend to like our antagonist, because in many ways an adventure game, or an adventure genre, and they say that the story is as good as the antagonist in an adventure, because it's just really important to have a strong, interesting antagonist. And I kind of hope that all of our antagonists are interesting. We work quite hard because, as I mentioned before, one of the commandments is know thy world better than God himself or herself. Know thy world, so that everything in it is consistent. But the other one is make sure that your antagonists are really interesting, so that they are genuinely sinister in regard to their relationship with the protagonist.
Okay, next question is, what are your favorite current games? Multiple people versus multiple platforms. People want to know what you're playing.
Well, thank you. The one I'm playing at the moment, which I really enjoyed to begin with, but I'm a bit rubbish at it, is Hades. Because
it's so good.
It is so good, but I keep getting sent back, and I can't really get into the story. And I know it's got a great story. I know it has, but it's like it to me, because I'm not very good. I die a lot, and
It can get
I'd like to
quite
get moving.
frustrating, yeah.
I find it a bit frustrating. But before then, and I know this is a couple of years ago, but the two that I really remember was What Remains of Edith Finch, which just was a beautifully designed game, and Inside Stroke Limbo, which just told a story in such a great way. I love the fact that Inside and Limbo can tell a really powerful emotional story without one word being written or spoken, and I think that's a phenomenal achievement.
The storytelling was so good.
It was so good. But you've got the Obra Dinn, What Remains of the Obra Dinn. The adventure genre, Her Story, a few years before that. The adventure genre is so rich. It's so rich, and it's very, very innovative. And point and click adventures are great. I would lump all adventures together, and if you play one, you should play them all, because these are all games that, as I said at the beginning, weave the story into the gameplay, and that to me is what defines an adventure. Whether it be point and click, whether it be video clips that are put together, however it is, whether it be 2D, whether it be 3D, and it's that's my favorite genre by a long way.
Makes sense. We skipped a question that Luke was prepped for, and I think it's such a good one. It is, how happy were you when you found Rolf Saxon as a voice actor for George by Peter from YouTube Live Chat?
Oh, what a nice question. I've got to tell you the truth.
Burned him out.
I don't actually remember, but I do very quickly. Rolf is a larger than life character. He's the nicest guy in the whole world. He's takes obviously acting extraordinarily seriously, and very quickly I loved him, but also very quickly he loved George. And What was very interesting is that he would go into the studio, he would take the time to talk to me about the story, understand the world, read the story. And if any actors weren't quite sure what was going on, he'd very much put them under his wing and he would explain to them. And this gave them enormous confidence. It also made the director's life very easy. And so he was just great. And it's just a real privilege to have had him for 5. And when we do a new one, we'll have him for 6, of course. And but to answer the question directly, and I've got to be honest with you, I just don't remember. But he's just spot on, isn't he? He's just great. He's just great. And what he often says is that when he arrived in the studio, he said, what accent do you want me to put on? And it's like, well, you're American, just speak yourself. And he says he's so pleased that, that we decided that, because it meant that he could really focus on the acting and the consistency across various iterations of the game, rather than having to worry about getting the accent back again and again. He is from Oakland. He's from California. That's who George is. So he's perfect.
Yeah, I agree. He's such a sweet person. Oh, we got a little scrambled. Oh my God, there's one. Luke, in case you're hearing this, there's one from OMFG Barbecue 1 via YouTube live chat. I'm posting it to you. It's looking back at Broken Sword 25 years later. What aspect of the game are you not happy with?
What
Oh,
a good question.
yeah, and I
What
saw
a
a similar
good
one that was like,
question.
what is there anything you regret? It was along the sides of like, is there anything you regret or that you would have done differently if you would have known in
That's a
hindsight?
really difficult question, because it would be extraordinarily arrogant to say no. What
Well, would it? Because I mean, we're here 25 years later.
let me tell you, let me answer slightly differently. We were working, the game was being published by a publisher called Virgin Interactive. It doesn't exist anymore. And I remember very well that back in those days, because there was such a lead time between a magazine publisher finishing the copy, then getting it to the printer, it had to be printed, then it had to be sent to the retailers, and that whole process took over a month. And if you wanted a game to release at the same time as the magazine, you had to give them the game before it was finished. And Virgin arranged a deal with a magazine that, again, doesn't exist anymore, called PC Zone. And the deal was that we would give them the game a month or 6 weeks before it was finished, on the basis that they would take into account the bugs that we knew that we were going to fix. Now, that's not enormously honest, because obviously sometimes those bugs didn't get fixed, but it was kind of what happened at the time, and we were told we had to give the game to PC Zone, so we did. And the game released 25 years ago last Thursday. Thank you for asking. At the same time that PC Zone came out, and the review was damning. It talked about the bugs. It talked about all of these things that were clearly going to be fixed. And I looked in absolute horror at what a horrible review this was. I mean, it was foul. And Virgin had been really excited by the potential of the game. And suddenly the wind was knocked out of everybody's sails. And it was like, what's going on? We thought this game was going to be well received, bloody, bloody, blur. And we had a real nail-biting month when all the rest of the magazines that hadn't been given the privileged copy and were actually reviewing the final copy, it took for them to appear. And suddenly this was this deluge of magazines, all of which were giving us 90+%. And it was, we were able to wipe the sweat from our brow, because, even though PC Zone, and they had done it was a pretty dirty thing to do, to be honest with you. to review it without accounting for this. If you agree to enter that contract, then it was a pretty nasty thing to do. But anyway, thankfully, the game was very, very well reviewed. I can't honestly think. It was a privilege and a real pleasure to be able to work with Barrington Feelong. We'd actually met about 5 years earlier. He was a young musician in London. I was working for a company called US Gold, and I was invited to actually no, I hadn't. Sorry, it was before I was working for US Gold. I'd set up my own development company called Paragon Programming. I just left Arctic, and I was living in London, and I became part of my girlfriend at the time. Her brother-in-law had a cricket team and asked me to play cricket, and Barrington was a very, very enthusiastic member of the team. So I'd actually met him before, and so it was great to be able to get together with him again. I was so thrilled when he said that he would play. I'm avoiding. Notice that I'm avoiding answering the question directly. The other very lucky thing was that I'd read in the magazine Edge that a college called Ballyfermot in Dublin was producing the most incredible animators for the Don Bluth studios, and we needed animators. So I went over to meet them, and I was shown round by a gentleman called Owen Cattle, who had worked for Don Bluth as a layout artist. And he asked me about games, and I showed him some of what we were doing. And he looked at it and he said, "You need a proper layout artist." He said, "You need to employ me." And he pulled out his layouts, and they were so beautiful, and they were so much better than what we were doing at that time. And I had to say, "Owen, I think we need to employ you." And he came and he worked with us. And what I loved about him was that he was super ambitious, and he was little and had a shrill voice, but he would really push us. He would go, "Why can't you do this? Why can't you do that?" And I remember for Broken Sword 2, for example, he said, "Why don't you change the angle of the that you look at the screens?" And I went, "Oh, and you can't do that. We've got sprites. We can't change the sprites. You just can't." He went, "Try it." I went, "No, no, no." Oh, no, we're not going to. He went, "Try it." I went, "Okay." So he drew a couple of things, a couple of screens at different angles, and we put the sprites in, and he was blooming right. Because ultimately it doesn't matter what's believable. It doesn't matter what's realistic. All that matters is that it's believable. And actually, if you looked at the character, the sprite drawn at this sort of angle, at this angle, it still looked fine. If you drew it at that angle, it still looked fine. And he'd been right that actually, the eye didn't have any problem with this changing perspective. And he was sort of very emboldened by all of these things. And I loved talking to him. I admired him enormously. And he's one of the many people that I owe a huge debt of gratitude to for, the talent that he brought to that original Broken Sword and then Broken Swords afterwards.
Okay, perfect.
Have I got away with it? When did you think?
I think it's a beautiful answer to a beautiful question. Can you tell us a bit more about the cooperation with ScumVM and how you think, and do you think it was important for the revival of adventure games? Nineberry via YouTube live chat.
I have thank you. What a great question. ScumVM are brilliant. Not so much for Broken Sword, but certainly for Lure of the Temptress and Beneath the Steel Sky. They were both written using in MS-DOS. MS-DOS was the precursor to Windows, Microsoft's Windows, and they were supported in 1994, and then I think it was in 1998, Windows 98 either stopped supporting it or maybe it was 2000. But anyway, towards the end of the 90s, or maybe in 2000, when Microsoft stopped supporting MS-DOS, it meant that the games were effectively gone. Nobody could play them. And ScumVM had just started, and they asked us, whether we could give them the source code. Now, from our perspective, the game was gone. we didn't expect. And once a game was out of retail, it was of no value anyway. So the idea of selling things digitally wasn't even crossing our minds. And there were 3 programmers that were Beneath the Steel Sky fans. And one of them was our wonderful CTO, Joost Peters, who was at university. And he took on a large part of converting it. And this was a big job, because what they did is they took the source code and they rewrote it to fit within their own engine. Another fellow was called Robert Groffingham, who I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago. And then there was a third person as well, whose name I don't know. And they brought the game, and it meant that we could bring it back to, and the reason that we decided that we'd give the game away for free was because if it wasn't for ScumVM, these games would have no opportunity to be published anyway. So we gave the games away for free. And then so both of those 2 are absolutely written under ScumVM, whereas for Broken Sword we have a slightly more peripheral relationship, but nevertheless, ScumVM is brilliant for that as well. ScumVM are extraordinarily important. Without ScumVM, there would never have been a Beyond a Steel Sky, and perhaps they are instrumental for so much of the revitalization of the genre on PC. So, any opportunity I have, I certainly, like to say what a huge debt of gratitude we owe to ScumVM.
Amazing. Okay, what was the next question, Luke? I lost track. Was it... Oh, it was Lertz's question. Thank you. So Lertz via YouTube live chat asked, I would really love to know what locations from the games I can actually visit in real life, or if there's some inspired that I can go to instead, or inspirations I can go to instead.
Okay, so absolutely. So for the first game, the game starts looking over the River Seine, and obviously you have the tragedy of the fire at Notre Dame. But those guys are doing an amazing job at building back up again. And if you were to climb up to the bell tower, when you can climb up to the bell tower again, you get this extraordinary view over Paris through the gargoyles. And that's number one. Number 2 was I was very inspired by a place called the Catacombs, because in the medieval times, there's an area in Paris called Les Halles, which is now a very touristy, beautiful area. But it used to be the graveyard for millions of Parisians, and it was horribly overcrowded, and it was next to the fruit market, and it was just disgusting. All these dead bodies, and then the food being sold. So they decided that they were going to move all of the bodies into the catacombs, and the catacombs were created because stone was mined from under Paris, and these long seams were turned into tunnels, and they go on for hundreds of kilometers. And one of them, the Royaume de Mort, is the Kingdom of Death in French, and millions of these bones were moved from Les Halles into the catacombs. And what they do is they put all the bone types together, so all the femurs are together, and the skulls and bits and pieces, and so it's really extraordinary, because you've got so many millions of these bones all together. And the Templars used the catacombs when in 1314, in 1307, when they were when there was the attempt to arrest them and steal their treasure. When the deputies arrived, the Templars had disappeared, because they obviously knew what was going to happen, and they had gone through the catacombs. So it felt like a really interesting area to go into. But also you had the old égouts, which are the sewers. So those 2 exist. And I could go through the whole game, but then later we go into in Broken Sword 5. There's a wonderful is it the Prada? It's something like Prado. The shopping center, amazing architecture there. In Broken Sword 5, we start in the area by Sacré Coeur, and and a lot of that is. I mean, there are just so many. There are so many. Nico's apartment is not in a real location, but we take inspiration, enormous inspiration. I mean, in Broken Sword 3, we go to Topkapi Palace, which is a proper location in Istanbul. Wherever possible, wherever possible. And can I tell one story? Because I know that we're going to run out of time in a minute. But when we were writing Broken Sword 5, and I don't want to do a spoiler, but I love the idea of trying to find the original Garden of Eden. And so I managed to convince Noreen that we should, we would go to Istanbul, which my dear friend Mevlut Dink, who is a developer, who's just written a very interesting book for anybody who's, about his time as a developer. And we wanted to go to an amazing place, or I wanted to go to an amazing place called Göbekli Tepe, which is 15,000 years old. I mean, it's so much older than, than Stonehenge or the pyramids. This is incredible. This is like the first known human habitation, stone habitation. And, the only problem is that it's on the border with Syria, and the war was raging. And, well, sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. The war's terrible. But the idea of going to this place called Urfa, which, was on the border, which was being shelled and blown up. But at the same time, I really, really, really wanted to go. And so I had a word with Mev, and Mevlut was working. His company had been bought by Turk Telecom, and so he had a word. And Turk Telecom said, "Well, what we'll do is we'll give you an escort," which was incredibly generous of them. So the four of us, his wife and I, and Noreen and I, flew out there, and we were met by a fleet of Turk Telecom vans. Now, this is a really sexist story, because Mev and I were put in the Mercedes with the boss, and Noreen and his wife were put in Turk Telecom vans and driven back to, for lunch, which was, obviously a terrible thing. And I better not even talk about it anymore. But anyway, the Göbekli Tepe was just incredible. The more they excavate, it was deliberately filled in. Nobody knows, maybe 12,000 years ago. I mean, and the more they excavate, the more it just goes on and on and on. And what was it? And that took that was very inspirational for the end of Broken Sword 5. I could go on. So many of the locations that we use are inspired and authentically draw on real locations that are interesting.
There's a question that weaves into this, and I lost my place again. Oh yeah, there. It's from Olvien via YouTube live chat as well, and it's going to be our last question of the day. So really milk that one if you want. How do you choose locations that George and Nico go to, and have you visited them yourself, which you partially already touched on? But how are they
Yeah.
chosen? What's the process that you go through? These
Right.
old
So
ones?
in a Broken Sword game, what we obviously have is an important historical conspiracy, for want of a better word, that has resonated into the modern day, and that is the basis of all of our games. And it might resonate because there's a date. So for Broken Sword 2, it's the fact that the date of the Mayan calendar and the end of the world was coming up. Broken Sword 1 and 3, it's a manuscript that comes, and manuscripts work well because they have puzzles that you need to solve, and you need to understand the history, and that history has to be really, really exciting. And my feeling is that if I can't be excited by the history, then why on earth should you be? Is my feeling. And so I guess the stories start with what is the historical element that we're going to draw on. And the funny thing is that there aren't that many subjects, and we dance with sort of Indiana Jones. So we started with a Knights Templar. Broken Sword, Indiana Jones 3 is Knights Templar. We then went on to the Mayans. We didn't have a crystal skull, but Indiana Jones 4 is the crystal skull, and we kind of go backwards and forwards. But we don't put aliens into our games. Just saying.
Smart. Smart.
And so the answer is yes, I will go almost always, because I think, one, it's wonderful to go, of course, but two, it's also a courtesy, because we will guarantee to you that our stories are authentic. We didn't put the Priory of Sion into Broken Sword 1 because it's utter nonsense. Dan Brown did because he'd read the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail and he'd believed every word of it, even though it was nonsense. Shall I shut up now, Wendy, do you think? Okay.
I think
Anyway,
it was a lovely question to round off this.
Yeah, no. So the answer is absolutely yes, because we want to be as authentic as possible. We want, it's a huge privilege that people trust the history that we convey in our stories. It's quite clear what is fact and what is fiction. I'll give you an example with Broken Sword 5. One of our designers, and I won't give too much of a spoiler away, but I was very excited when you triangulate or quadrangulate across, and of the key locations, two of them actually went straight across the area that we wanted to, and one of them was here, and I had to find a fourth, so that the perfect point at which these two lines crossed was the area that we wanted to go into. And one of the designers kind of changed it. And I looked at him. He was quite a forceful guy. I said, "This is done. This has to be the way." He went, "Nobody will notice." I went, "No, very few people will notice, but the people who do notice will really care. We are not going to change it. This is the way it's going to be." Because what we have is a relationship with people that they know that if we put stuff down, it isn't nonsense. To the best of my knowledge, it isn't nonsense. So what we don't do is just go onto the internet and find crazy stories. We get the history from sources that we trust, and the old expression, "Fact is stranger than fiction," really couldn't be truer, because if you look back hundreds of years, the most terrible, brutal things were happening, but also the most beautiful, wonderful things, and we want to reflect both. And bring it forward, and in many ways, for those to be a metaphor for all the terrible and the beautiful things that are happening today. And that's it.
Yeah. And on that note, it's been so wonderful to have you all here. It's actually incredible to see that most people who joined the stream watched it all the way through. I can see it in the analytics, which is really nice.
Well, thank you. Thank you to them, and thank you to you, Wendy, and thank you to Luke, the unsung hero in all of this.
It's true. Luke had to stay late because he's the one in the office that facilitates this stream. But this was a lovely AMA. Thank you guys for all of your questions. We're incredibly lucky that, given that this studio started before the domestic internet was really that much of a thing, that you guys all found us. It really means a lot. And it's not something that we will ever take for granted. I know that some of you feel annoying to ask about new games that we're working on or not, etc. But don't ever feel scared to ask us. We might not answer, mostly because unless something is 100% certain, we will not talk about it, because
sorry, Wendy, can I throw something else in? What we're very lucky, what we're very, very lucky is that we don't have masters that we have. So we will always tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And if we can't tell you something, we will tell you that we can't tell you. What we won't ever do is lie to you. And that's, really, really important to us, isn't it, Wendy?
Yes. And a lot of the time when we can't tell you something, it's because we want to make sure that we would never, ever tease you or play with your expectations, promise something we can't fulfill, etc. But we would never, ever feel bored or not excited for you guys wanting us to keep making games and keep giving you new experiences. And we love you very much. And if you guys want to, I am going to head over to Discord now, which is on discord.gg/revolutionsoftware. And I'm going to go and hang out, chat with you guys, play some Among Us, and then head to an early night at 10. So if you guys want to be part of that, you can do that. And unless you're doing that, then let's say goodbye.
And thank you again. You
And
guys are
thank you
wonderful.
again. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Cheers.